Hello and welcome to Writing Illness, Mental Health, Chronic Pain, and Disability. My name is Dan Hurd. I'm the Director of Adult Programs at Writers and Books. I'm a white man with short blonde hair, beard, glasses, and a red plaid shirt. Writers and Books would like to call attention to the complex and troubled history of the lands on which we live and work. We're recording this panel from the unceded ancestral homelands of the Onondaga, or the people of the Great Hill. In English, they are known as the Seneca people or the Keeper of the Western Door. This is Writing Illness. As I said, how do we write authentically about illness or disability, both our own and those in our families and communities? Four writers explore different approaches to writing about and through illness, both visible and invisible, with care, and discuss writing as care work, advocacy, and activism in the time of COVID. Our panelists are Sopan Deb, Carley Moore, Sejal Shah, and our moderator is Sally Bittner Bonn. Now I'll turn it over to Sally.
Thank you so much, Dan, and thank you to all of our panelists and to everyone who is in the audience listening today. I am Sally Bittner Bonn. I am a middle-aged white woman with curly, mostly brown hair, wearing a green sweater and a blue top, and there are books behind me and some framed art. I would like to take a moment to acknowledge our ASL interpreter, Paige Bixby. We are so grateful for you being here today with us. And we're going to, everyone's going to share some of their own writing, and we're going to engage in a conversation. But before we do that, I would like to welcome our curator of this panel. We are so lucky to have had Sejal Shah here to bring us all together in such a unique way. And so I'm going to turn it over to Sejal to get us started.
Thanks so much, Sally. I'm Sejal Shah. I'm a South Asian American woman in my 40s. I'm wearing a blue scarf and earrings and dangly earrings and a maroon and black horizontally striped shirt. Also with bookshelves behind me and some framed art. I was invited to curate this panel and wanted to get writers that I have been thinking about, whose work I know, to get us in the same room together. And this this panel is, we have some funding from the Disability Visibility Project and Alice Wong. And it was originally for me to do an online, virtual, accessible event for my book, This Is One Way to Dance, that came out last year. No, not 2020. It came out in 2020. Thank you. And it was so exhausting. I didn't do that. And by the time I had the wherewithal to plan something, I realized I really wanted to be in conversation with other writers. So there's a little something I wrote about it. There's now more conversation and writing about disability and illness, and many writers and activists I know involved in this. But when I was thinking about this panel, I thought of Sally. I've been privileged to know her work and to learn both about disability and advocacy in the classes and workshops she took with me at Writers and Books after I left New York City and academia and moved back here to our hometown of Rochester. Speaking of New York City, I met Carley there, I think almost exactly 20 years ago, through mutual friends, soon after I moved to Brooklyn. But we got to know each other better through our writing, particularly over the last several years. Carley is originally from Jamestown, New York, and is a multi-genre writer, poet, teacher, novelist, essayist. Carley's writing about illness, and in particular, invisible disability, made a huge impression on me. Also invisible labor and depression. Read her essay about saying no to the patriarchy and why I can't have coffee with you, and it'll blow your mind. And this book of hers, which you can, 16 Pills, it's an essay collection that I also really love. And we realized recently that we've never done a reading or panel or been in any sort of public conversation together, and that seemed ridiculous. Finally, I first met Sopan Deb on Twitter in 2020, the year both of our first books came out. Mistranslations. Meeting the immigrant parents who raised me. Excellent. And in part, I knew about his book because my book ended up on a list. It was Bitch Media with his book's cover on the list. So which was funny. And then I got to know Sopan on through Twitter later. But I was struck by the way he wrote about depression in his family. Often there's stigma in even acknowledging mental illness or even talking about mental health in South Asian American and Asian American cultures more generally. Sopan has a Rochester connection too. His father landed in Rochester first before moving on to New England. Yes, Sopan? And I was thinking about, it's one thing perhaps to write about one's own illness or depression, but depression affects families. So just thinking about how do we write about our lives? How is it safe to write about it? And how do we write about the lives of others?
Oh, is that a question to me? Sorry.
No, sorry. I was going to just say, yeah, thank you for agreeing to be on this panel. And I'm trying.
Oh, sorry. Oh,
no.
Happy to be here. Sorry. Sorry. I was.
No, it's not. It's not specifically to you. It's just something.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I'm here.
It'll get to you.
Okay. Sorry.
Great rhetorical question, but easily a question we could all answer, right? Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Sejal. We're going to go ahead and begin the reading portion of our panel. Each of us will share just a little bit of our work. And first, we're going to hear from Carley, and I will share Carley's official bio after that personal connection information from Sejal. Thank you. Carley Moore is an essayist, novelist, and poet whose work has been widely published. Her books include 16 Pills, an essay collection, The Not Wives, a novel, Portal Poem, a poetry chapbook, and The Stalker Chronicles, a young adult novel. Carley is a queer, disabled, single, co-parenting mom, a sex-positive, intersectional feminist, cat wife, and Vans lover. She is a clinical professor of writing and critical creative production in the Global Liberal Studies program at New York University, and a senior associate at Bard College's Institute for Writing and Thinking. She lives in New York City. You can follow Carley on Instagram at Fragmented Sky. Welcome, Carley.
Thank you so much, Sally. Thank you, Sejal, for pulling us all together. And Sopan, I'm so excited to hear your work. And thank you, Dan and Paige, also for organizing, and ASL. I just want to describe myself as I am a 49-year-old white woman. I have a pixie haircut, which is brown, and I have a fringe of magenta in the front, and I'm wearing a green sweatshirt. And behind me is the front door to my apartment, and also a tapestry from Israel, which I love very much. It has cherries on it. So I'm just going to read, I'm trying to practice my just use. I'm going to read from my novel Pampocalypse, which is coming out on March 8th from Feminist Press. I'm going to read from the beginning of it. Pampocalypse is, I wrote the first half of it sort of live during the time of the beginning of COVID, and Feminist Press serialized the first half, and then I finished it over the summer. Pampocalypse stands for, I have to find everything. Oh, it's not in here. It stands for, oh, here it is. It stands for pansexual plus pandemic plus apocalypse equals Pampocalypse. So this is week 1, May 3rd, 2020. Robot dictator. Hi, this is a test. How do you like my voice? This is a work of autofiction. Some things are true, some things are made up. I am currently making this as you are reading it, and because of my various disabilities, I'm dictating it. I think it's going to work. Robot dictation device, robot dictator. If you can learn my voice, if you can fix my mistakes, then we can write this book together. Good little robot, good little dog, good little machine. Would you like us to give you a name? What do you want to be called? Capitalize, delete, backspace, backspace, backspace. I don't know what to call you yet, so let's see what happens. Little robot, I need you because of my muscles, because the pain in my shoulder and my hips doesn't go away. It's worse during the pandemic, but everything is worse during the pandemic. This is a weekly gift should you need it. I make it for both of us so that we don't go crazy, but honestly, I'm already mentally ill. It's for the community because now more than ever, we must make our own things and take care of ourselves as best we can. Let me know if you think of a name for my dictation robot. Sometimes the robot breaks and can't hear me and I get fed up and type and hurt my muscles anyway because that's what we do. We work through pain. So you may experience disjointedness or breaks or spasms in the text and in me. They can't be helped. Kids always used to call me a spaz when they wanted to fuck with me, and I'm reclaiming it. They weren't wrong. They were just assholes. Disjointed time, broken time, nonlinear time, lockdown time, sick time. I aim to fuck with time because mass illness has fucked time. We're all disabled now. I'll just read a tiny bit of this next section because I don't have too much time left. My bike. I buy a bike. A store in the East Village is open for essential workers of the pandemic. Delivery people on bikes, mostly immigrants, often undocumented. In line with me, there's a man with a broken bike chain. And two friends with a bike that needs new brakes. A couple of homeless men wander by. What are you waiting for? Bike shop, we mumble through our masks. There's a light drizzle. I fold and unfold my umbrella. It's a gray day, not a riding day. A man in a motorized wheelchair zips up too close to me so that he can ask if the tobacco store next to the bike shop is closed. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carley. As we were commenting, it's very impressive that you've written an entire novel during the pandemic. Maybe we'll talk about that in our conversation. We're next going to hear from Sejal, and let me formally introduce Sejal, our amazing curator and incredible writer. Sejal Shah is a poet who works in prose, writing across genres and disciplines. She is the author of the award-winning debut essay collection, This Is One Way to Dance, from University of Georgia Press in 2020. Her stories and essays have appeared in The Guardian, Brevity, Conjunctions, Guernica, Kenyon Review, Literary Hub, Long Reads, and The Rumpus. The recipient of a 2018 New York Foundation for the Arts Fellowship in Fiction, Sejal recently completed a story collection with images. Her newer writing is about friendship, school, and mental health. She lives in Rochester, New York. Welcome, Sejal.
Thank you, Sally. I guess I didn't put this in my bio right, but I am on Twitter and Instagram at Sejal Shah Writes. You can find me online there. I am going to read from a reading list that I wrote last year, that I wrote and published in 2020 after my book came out, because before my book came out, I published an essay that went viral in the Kenyon Review about invisible disability and neurodiversity, about having a mood disorder. And it also originally had ADHD in it. And I ended up cutting that out, but that was also part of that essay. And I don't talk about any of that, really, just depression in my book. So I'll, and I got emails asking about why that essay wasn't in the book, or why I hadn't written more about mental health than I did. So in a way, it was kind of my thinking through that. So this was in Electric Literature and was called 9 Books Where Women of Color Tell Their Own Stories About Mental Health. And at one point, I think what they had for the title was about mental illness. And I asked them, I said, actually, no, I think it's about health more broadly, which includes illness. So I often describe my debut collection, This Is One Way to Dance, as essays about race, place, and belonging written across 20 years. But these essays are also meditations on friendship, time, and love, on how to keep moving in the face of trauma and loss. My book is about making one's way in the world, finding and claiming home. This Is One Way to Dance includes travel narratives, linear narratives, and several lyric essays. At some point, I learned the name for a form I had begun writing, the lyric essay, a hybrid form between the essay and the lyric poem in which utterances circling unphrasable plot is the norm. Although I shaped and revised essays to make a memoiristic arc, when I reread This Is One Way to Dance, the gaps and silences in the narrative surprised me. In an essay I wrote about my relationship to food and cooking, I mentioned that I spent much of one year on my couch depressed, watching reruns of Friends. But I didn't mention the story behind the story, that I had been diagnosed with a major mood disorder and had a terrible time finding a medication that allowed me to speak, that didn't have the side effect of aphasia, my sentences trailing off, that I had lost my confidence after repeated sexual harassment and assault by a professor in my program, and that I had struggled to make sense of myself as a writer of color in a creative writing program with a racist and silent workshop model, which was standard at the time. Last year, in an essay not in my book, I wrote about neurodiversity and manic depression. I could only write that essay after the other essays that were, in so many ways, about what could not be said at various points in my life. During those years, I looked to writers and books who showed me a way forward, women of color who had reference points other than Western medicine or binary models of illness and health. Books helped me feel less alone. They helped me find words to talk back. So the first book on my list is Sister Outsider by Audre Lorde. Yay. Just a tremendous book. I have descriptions written about all 9 books, and I'm gonna just mention what the books are, but the one I wanted to read from is the second book, which is Bell Hooks's Talking Back. Talking Back, Thinking Feminist, Thinking Black. In these essays, Hooks writes of the difficulty of claiming a voice, the anguish of speech, the use of a family name as a pseudonym. I bought this book in the 90s when I was in graduate school and continued to refer to it over the years. Hooks describes a fear of madness and how she was sure madness was the destiny of daring women born to intense speech. Like many women, she was taught to talk in a way that was also a kind of silencing. In Talking Back, Hooks connects the defiant speech that could be seen as madness to the same impulse that allowed her to claim herself as an independent thinker and writer. And since we just lost her recently, it's felt especially resonant for me. Although I don't think of losing her because she's with us. And this is a quote that I've been thinking about a lot. To make my voice, I had to speak. To hear myself talk, and talk I did, which is also from Talking Back. My other selections included Olive Witch, which is a Abir Hoax memoir, a cross-cultural memoir. Claudia Rankin, Citizen. I think in this time of COVID and pandemic, this is such an important text. Care Work, Leah Lakshmi Peepsna Samara Sinha, Dreaming Disability Justice. They were really thinking ahead of, I think, where our country and culture has been. Dear Friend from My Life, I Write to You in Your Life, Yi Yun Lee. It's written about depression. And Yeah, it's really tremendous. And reading. So how books can help us. The Collected Schizophrenias, Esme Wei-Jung Wong. Minor Feelings, Kathy Park Hong, An Asian American Reckoning. And finally, Mia Birdsong, who's also originally from Rochester, How We Show Up, Reclaiming Family, Friendship, and Community. Also super relevant for these times. You can find the whole list on Electric Literature. 9 books where women of color tell their own stories about mental health.
Thank you so much, Sejal. So important to uplift those voices. Greatly appreciate it. I think I'm the next up to read. I think you're officially going to introduce me, Sejal. Is that true?
Yes, thank you. Sally Bittner Bonn is a writer, performer, and teaching artist who promotes disability awareness through her writing, oscar-go.org, the website. She served as both cast member and producer for Listen to Your Mother, and currently is working on a memoir about raising her artist/activist son who navigates the world from a power wheelchair. Sally is the director of youth education at Writers and Books and lives with her family in Rochester, New York.
Thanks so much, Sejal. I'm going to read from my essay, A Brief History of the Wheel. I will just point out that I make reference to my son in this as an 8-year-old. He would absolutely want to make it perfectly clear that he is actually a 13-year-old at this time. This is, referencing a time in the past. He would not want to be known as an 8-year-old, right? So this is an excerpt from this essay, A Brief History of the Wheel. The wheel was invented more than 5,500 years ago, probably on the land that is now Iraq, and likely first as a potter's wheel. The first wheel used for transportation is thought to have come several hundred years later. According to the Smithsonian, most inventions mimic nature. The pitchfork and table fork come from a forked branch. The airplane emulates a soaring bird. But apparently, there are no wheels in nature. The wheel was a product of pure human innovation. The wheels in our house have propelled me forward into a community I previously knew nothing about, had no connection with or understanding of. I'm not sure what I used to think when I passed someone in a wheelchair, but I'm pretty sure I usually looked the other way. I'm pretty sure my mind trained on what was different and not the same. Now I go twice a week to take my son to aquatherapy, to a center filled with people of all abilities, from the preschool program to the adult day hab program and everything between. We see all kinds of wheels there: walker wheels, manual chair wheels, power chair wheels, shower and pool chair wheels, adaptive bike wheels, scooter wheels, all variety of people using wheels or not using wheels for mobility. Here, the wheel is the norm. There's no sense of other here, no sense of being different, a place we can all settle into our skin a little more deeply. The root of the word manual comes from the Latin and means of the hand. A manual wheelchair is propelled forward with hands on the wheels. A power wheelchair is operated most often with a joystick. We don't say electric wheelchair because, well, electric chair. We don't say motorized because the word power carries layers, provides a quiet, positive connotation. It is not a car, cart, scooter, though these do exist, contraption, buggy, or anything else people say in order to avoid using the word wheelchair. People who use wheelchairs know what they are called. Somehow it seems some people who walk have a fear of using the word wheelchair, especially in relationship to a child. I can now hear 8-year-old Oscar coming from the other end of the house, not because I hear the slap of bare feet or the stomping of sneakers, but because I hear the floorboards creak under the weight of his wheels. I hear the hum of the motor on his chair. Out on the driveway in winter, Oscar makes graceful loops and curves as his tires lift the white snow to reveal the black pavement beneath. There is a grace, a smoothness to his movements as he speeds back and forth on flat surfaces that is unachievable by the human body alone. Even the most adept dancers can never move with this particular quality of fluidity. One winter day, as I went to volunteer at Oscar's school, I walked along the sidewalk lining the whole front of the school, snow packed tight by thousands of unrecognizable boot prints, one layer upon another. No parent could have found evidence of their child's steps among this mosaic. But I saw it, the remnants of tire tracks amidst all the boot prints. And I knew a portion of the exact path my son had traversed that very morning. All righty, thank you for listening. And it is now my honor to introduce Sopan. Sopan Deb is a writer for the New York Times and a New York City-based stand-up comedian. He reported on Donald Trump's presidential campaign from start to finish as a campaign embed for CBS News. Covering hundreds of rallies in more than 40 states, he was named a breakout media star of the election by Politico. He won an Edward R. Murrow Award for Larger Than Life, a documentary he produced for the Boston Globe on NBA Hall of Famer Bill Russell's complicated relationship with the city of Boston. Sopan's memoir, Missed Translations, Meeting the Immigrant Parents Who Raised Me, was published by Day Street Books in 2020. Welcome, Sopan.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm 5'9", South Asian man with a blue t-shirt on with a very basic white wall behind me. I'll be reading from my debut novel, which comes out in July, called Keadasa's Second Act, which is basically about a Bengali family in New Jersey trying to heal from grief through staging a play. And so in this section, I'm going to read where we meet Shantanu Das, who is a divorced anthropology professor. And at this point in the story, what we know about him is that his teenage daughter died in a car crash and he's going to seek therapy. So he's in his first therapy session with a Dr. Harry Lynch. And so I'll just kind of pick up in the middle of the section and start reading until you guys are sick of it. No, I'm just kidding. I'll just stop at some point. Okay, anyway. Do you prefer Dr. Das or Shantanu? Am I pronouncing that correctly? Dr. Lynch said. Shantanu is fine, thanks. And you? Harry is great, Dr. Lynch said. He rolled up his left sleeve to show the copious amounts of hair on his forearm. My kids think my name is a result of all the hair. You know, Harry. As an anthropologist, Shantanu had spent decades being an expert in how humans behave, and how bizarre it was to be in a room across from someone in a different field to understand himself. He had felt less nervous all those years ago when he was defending his thesis, an exploration of how migratory patterns were linked to public health in urban areas. How does this work? What do I say? Shantanu asked, feeling ridiculous. Indians aren't typically known for going to seek therapy. He reminded Dr. Lynch as much as himself. If Dr. Lynch had thoughts, he remained guarded. He just smiled. So what do you want to talk about? Shantanu said. Dr. Lynch's gaze was unwavering. He hunched forward in his chair, put both elbows on his knees, and rested his face on his hands. Unnerved by Dr. Lynch's stare, Shantanu studied Dr. Lynch's face just as intently. Does he have no wrinkles? You came here for a reason, Shantanu, Dr. Lynch said. You said on the phone that you thought you needed some help, so let me help you. It's my job. Tell me about yourself. Shantanu ran through a short version of his story, aware that he was wasting valuable time in his allotted 45 minutes. He'd been a professor at Rutgers for almost 25 years. He did his undergrad and PhD at Rutgers too. He'd been in New Jersey his whole life. His parents, who were in an arranged marriage, settled in Hillsborough, about an hour north after immigrating from Kolkata. Initially, Shantanu's grandfather on his father's side objected to their marriage, but because of how dark Kalpana's skin was, But beyond the colorism, Shantanu's grandfather had always been choosy, and he was always finding something wrong with prospective wives. So he relented at his father's insistence, so he didn't have to deal with the shame of having an unmarried son for too much longer. For his part, Amitabha was just tired of waiting. That didn't stop his parents from openly grumbling about whether Shantanu's mother was worthy of their son, and derisively referring to her as someone who belonged to the lowest case in society. I have a daughter who lives in New York. She's been alive for as long as I've been a professor. She's vibrant, but we don't speak often, Shantanu said. I had another one, and lately, Dr. Litch interrupted. I'm sorry, did you say had? He said. Had, yes. I lost my younger daughter 5 years ago, which is why, I suppose. What did you mean before when you said Indians aren't typically known for going to seek therapy? We're not. My parents thought therapists were for, Shantanu mime quotes, crazy people. There was a nod of understanding from Dr. Lynch. Shantanu paused. Sorry. Maybe I should come back next week. I've given you plenty to chew on, he said. We showed up empty-handed, Dr. Lynch said instantly and with a straight face. I'm sorry, Shantanu said. Dr. Lynch repeated himself, and then Shantanu understood the joke. Shantanu, please, you've come this far. I interrupted you when I shouldn't have. I'm sorry. In my defense, I never said I was a good therapist, Dr. Lynch said. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Sopan. Oh, it's so exciting to hear all of your work. So we're going to head into a conversation now, and we can just kind of have an open discussion. I just kind of love to start with the idea of, the whole theme of this conference is taking care. And how do we take care, and what does that mean? What does that mean through the lens of mental health, chronic pain, disability? What does that mean through the times of COVID? What does that mean as a writer? I would just love to hear from each of you about this concept of taking care and how it applies. So who wants to jump in and get started?
I'll hop in. It was so great to hear everyone read. I would just say initially my first thoughts about taking care are the panelists know this, but listeners don't, as I'm just coming into my 11th day of, I don't really have COVID anymore, but I had COVID. And right before this, I was thinking about, I wasn't feeling great right before this, although I'm feeling better now. And I was doing that thing that I think all people with disabilities have to do, which is think about, okay, what does my body need right now? And also, what does my mind need? And so I was, I had a moment where I thought, I don't feel like I can do the panel. And then I was like, but I know that I really just felt like doing it would make me feel better. And that's true. So I think there's taking care for me, I would just say is this sort of constant, and I think for many people now, and disabled people, I think I've known this for the longest, but the section that I read in my book is about COVID making us all disabled now. I think for me, it's often about these sort of constant decisions between what's good in the long run for my body and what's good in the now, and then also just navigating work and parenting and teaching in particular. Yeah, so I'll start with that. I'm sure I'll have more to say, but it just strikes me as very ironic or not ironic, or just important in some ways that I'm coming off of COVID and coming onto this panel. Also having written a book set during the time of COVID and spent the time writing and also avoiding somehow miraculously getting it.
I think if there's a shift that I've seen, and I'm sure many of you might agree during the pandemic, is that I think, at least for those of us, who have the privilege and are able to do this, I think there has been a societal shift about how we view self-care, which by extension means how we view our relationship to work. And, you're seeing, we've heard about the Great Resignation. We've seen a lot of people that are quitting their jobs or going out of their way to, work from home, and we're learning that, more and more jobs, you don't actually have to be in the office for them, that you can be just as productive at home. We're seeing, you don't have to live in, New York or DC or Chicago. You can live, in wherever the, self-care is also on a financial level. So maybe if your company is based in New York and you can't afford New York rent, we're finding now that you can do that same job in the, where the rent is a lot less. And so I think if there's one, now the question is whether this is a long lasting effect or whether when the, whether we're in the pandemic, when the pandemic is over, if it ever ends, and whether companies will really acquiesce to that shift. I don't know, but I do think we're seeing a lot of people who are tired of burnout and saying, I'm going to take control of my life, and I'm going to make my life less about work and less about, giving something to a company and more about giving something to myself.
Sopan, I'm interested in knowing about like what it's like to be a journalist. I mean, during this time, I feel like that you're moving in a faster. Yeah, and I think maybe also just wondering, not to essentialize, but just for someone who's male, I mean, I think that women and non-binary folks have in some ways slightly different issues around that.
Yeah, I come from a point of privilege, right? Because when the pandemic happened, I work at the New York Times, and the New York Times is not going to fold, right? Whereas, there are entire media outlets that shut it. I'm very lucky. I'm very fortunate. I'm fortunate to be employed. I'm fortunate that, I'm fortunate that, yeah, and you're right. Of course, I don't have the same challenges that women and non-binary people do. As I said, I come from a point of privilege. I'm very lucky that I didn't get laid off. I didn't get. I'm able to, and there are a lot of journalists that during the pandemic quit because of burnout. And
yeah, I mean, I guess that was sorry. I'm just going to.
Here's what I will say about that, though.
Yeah.
In terms of like the burnout side of it, I do wish that there was a little bit more acknowledgement from journalists who say they're burned out, they're going to quit, that's privilege that you can do that, because a lot of people can't do that. A lot of people need the paychecks, are lucky to get a paycheck. But if you have the privilege and you have the financial stability to do it, that's, great. In my case, I don't believe that I do. And so, yeah, but there were a lot of journalists that were decided, during the pandemic, what, I'm tired of this. I'm tired of an industry that's shrinking, that's not expanding. I'm tired of kind of running on this hamster wheel, and then there are a lot of journalists who are just tired of covering COVID, which, I personally never was in a hospital or covered COVID in like a direct way. My beat has covered COVID in a more kind of tangential way. But in terms of the people that are on the front lines in the hospitals, in hospital, ambulance ride-alongs, or having to go out, actually go to like, to the front line. Yeah, that's a very draining experience, because you're just surrounded by suffering, and that's your job. And so now going on for, almost 2-3 years now. So you could see why people that write about that all day are drained by it.
Totally. And I appreciate, Carley, that you've written about just how exhausting it is to be teaching during the pandemic, and your students needing care, and as a parent, as a single co-parenting parent, and as a writer, and just what institutions are doing, not doing, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I have, I of course have a lot of privilege too as a white woman, teaching at NYU. I'm not an adjunct, I'm not tenured, I'm contract faculty. So I have a fair amount of job stability, although it's true that the university, and this is true, I think there were leaked emails from Columbia, and NYU is no different. I'm sure their emails were just not leaked, but that the university definitely relies on contract and adjunct faculty to teach the things that tenured faculty don't want to do, or don't want to teach. I mean, my program is a little different in that we're all contract and adjunct, and we don't have any tenured faculty in our program. So, but yeah, we teach more than any tenured faculty person would make, and arguably, probably not arguably, definitely statistically, for about, I probably make a third of what a white male tenured professor makes at NYU. But I still feel like I've had a lot of privilege in that my job is very secure. And I have, the first year of the pandemic, I was able to teach remotely, and that was true for pretty much anyone who wanted to in our program, which was a big deal. And I went back to in-person this fall, which I really didn't want to do, but I have to say, in terms of my mental health, it was really good for me. I had really missed being in the classroom, and I'd really missed the community and conversations that happen in person with my students. I will also say that by the end of this semester, in terms of their mental health and my mental health, and their just and COVID, and like, I have never experienced so many sort of student meltdowns and breakdowns than I have this semester. And they don't always take the form that I think teachers would wish they would take, which is, students being able to be very reflective about what's going on in their lives. And, as a mother of a 13-year-old, I actually, of course, I think that comes in really handy for me, because I'm like, okay, I understand that there's some major shit going on that's just kind of getting put onto me. That's not really about me, but that's been really, really hard this semester. Like, just trying to be like, I think I'm just running like the most chill class you could ever have. And I told everyone, like, you're still all getting A's, like, it's the pandemic, like, everyone's getting an A. But there's just, they have so much stress, and we're talking about burnout. NYU students are just the most overachieving students, and they do not know how to chill, and they have done really, really well as overachievers. So it's really hard to get them to step back. And they also have a lot at stake, because, some of them are taking out loans that will be $200,000 by the time they're done. So yeah, it's been very intense teaching. I'm glad to have a break.
Yeah, I bet. It seems to me that, being in education right now is, stressful at every level. I was just reading a piece yesterday about, the crisis in education, and the comment was, self-care for teachers needs to be thrown out the window. It's time that everyone else takes care of the educators. And that seems to be, more important now than ever.
Yeah, and I would just add, I'm not even, I teach at the college level, so I have so many less students than, say, my daughter's teachers, who every day see, are teaching over 100 students over the course of the day.
Yeah.
And just being in contact with her school often, and her teachers, it's just incredible what elementary, middle, and high school teachers are doing right now. Like, it's completely untenable.
Yes, and that from everything I've heard, this year is harder than last year. Everyone thought last year was the hardest year ever, and that things are much more challenging this year. So much empathy for all the educators.
Yeah, so upon what I heard in your piece too, which connects to kids being in school too, is just this, and Sejal, you've written about this quite a bit, and I've read about it, and I've talked with many of my students about it. It's just in East Asian culture about, the stigma in many cultures, but around therapy. And I thought you captured that so well and so quickly, Sopan, in the bit that you read. I mean, one thing I think that is changing is people's feelings about therapy, especially in younger people, um, which is something that I've just noticed in my own daughter. Like a couple of years ago, she was like absolutely against therapy, and now she's like, "Yes, I would like a therapist, please." And I'm like, "Okay, well, they're all booked forever." But I do think that's something that's changing also because of COVID. People just can't put aside their mental health issues anymore.
Yeah, I think that's right. Although the hard part is that as more people seek therapists, they become harder, they become more expensive. So it's a classist thing, right? I mean, I know in New York, where I was living for the last 8 years, and also I've since moved to DC, it's hard to find a therapist that accepts insurance. So who gets therapy? It's who gets to address their mental health? It's people who have wealth. And so once again, it's an example of serious inequity in our system. But to the point, to your point about, look, my parents, the generation before us, like my mom, I'm speaking for my own parents, my mom and dad, who were born in India, they were arranged to get married, and they came here. They did. If you ask them, hey, did you ever think about self-care or mental health? It's not just that they would say, I don't know what it's not that they would just say no. They wouldn't even understand the question. They wouldn't understand what you were talking about. And a lot of that comes from kind of a generational, like when my parents came to this country, they were just trying to get by. They were trying to get to the end of the day, right? They were just trying to put food on the table and pay bills and stay employed and essentially stay alive. I think therapy, one of the things that I feel, I saw therapists for several years in my 20s. It's a little bit of I consider myself lucky that I had the self-awareness to know to be able to seek that my parents didn't have. So yes, I agree with you generally that in kind of each ensuing, there's much less stigma attached to it now. But now that there's less stigma attached to it, it's kind of a capitalist supply and demand situation where it's now incidentally harder to come by in some ways.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Yeah, I just wanted to yes you.
Well, thank you.
I wanted,
very good to do.
Sejal, I feel like you might jump in at this point too, because you mentioned, and you and I have talked about this, but you mentioned, people after your Kenyan review essay, people asking you or wondering, why didn't you write about this set of disabilities or mental illness or depression why didn't you put more of that in your book? And I think you said something about like I needed to write all these other essays before I could write these. So I'm just curious about how that connects to what we're talking about.
Yeah, thanks, Carly. One thing I just wanted to say, connecting to what Sopan just said was, there's a real shortage of shrinks, and I mentioned this, but in Rochester, for example, even though we have the University of Rochester Medical Center and all of that in fact, the year my book came out, I started a new job. I was doing all these Zoom events, and so while I got feedback from people like, oh, it looks like it's going so well, blah, blah, blah. But actually what was happening was evening Zoom events were giving me insomnia. I wasn't sleeping. The ADHD medication I took was then, I got manic, which I don't usually, but so it was kind of terrible just trying to work within the system, right? Like, okay, I'm promoting my book, I'm doing this. And then I couldn't, my doctor had moved out of state and was no longer, who was not taking insurance to begin with, right? So it was kind of a disaster. I didn't have a doctor, and I was like, oh, well, it's fine. I'm stable and I'm working on my, I didn't have time to go find someone. And then it was kind of a mess. I was able to find someone through telehealth out of state who did take insurance. But I was just thinking, you know, I'm also coming from this great privilege of that I'm not teaching full time right now. The way that I was able to finish my book was that I got married and I have a spouse and have insurance through him. and you know, and so I appreciate both of you bringing up privilege, because, you know, I had friends reach out to me who were graduate school classmates, and I said, you know, I want you to understand this, like, you know, because they're raising kids and they're doing all this. And I said, it's not a level playing field. Like, I couldn't have done this when I was teaching 4 classes, right? And probably not when I was teaching 3. Carley, thanks for that question too. I also, you know, this is one way to dance. Like, I grew up dancing, and I think that it was, in a way, writing these essays where it's a kind of a performance of self. And I certainly didn't think of myself as disabled in any way. And that's something I still think about, like, what is, you know, I feel like our culture is really sick in general. So, you know, if you're having trouble functioning within a culture that doesn't make sense, is sick, is saying, sure, you can, you know, go take care of yourself if you have the time and money to find a therapist, right? And pay for that. Like, how possible is that really? So I think that, you know, I think there was a part of me that still wanted to present a picture of, if not health, then of achievement. You know, I grew up in a suburb of Rochester, Brighton, which is all about, hey, we have this kid going to Harvard and this kid going to Yale. And, you know, it's all about professional achievement. And so, but I also got tired. I think that was the thing of, you know, being in my 40s, I got tired, and I wanted to write something that was actually acknowledging something about what my real life is like. And that's often why I respond so strongly, Carley, to your work. Like, I have this postcard here, and I think about this a lot, but in terms of taking care, what yes comes from saying no. That if you are socialized, or if it's just your personality, if you're a people pleaser, you know, yes, I'll do this. Yes, I'll do that. Yeah, can you look at this? Can you read this over? Can you meet me for coffee? Then you aren't creating maybe some of the conditions that would help you to do your best writing, to rest, to see your aging parents, any of those things. And yet we're not encouraged to do that. And so how to fight against that. And I'm interested in writing more about mental health and mental illness in ways that I think I haven't seen before. You know, one of the things with that Kenyan essay is that I apparently accidentally outed my spouse, who also has a mental health diagnosis. And but the response to the essay was so overwhelming that he and my parents were both like, you should be writing more about this. Like, this is actually helping people. I had an undergrad from Cornell write to me and say, you know, like, how do you do this? How do you go on? Like, I would like to be a professor. I would like to, you know, go on in science. Like, how, you know, I think there's a great need for it.
I want to respond first, Sejal, to you sharing that postcard, because you know, you shared that with, you know, our group of writers that have worked with you for many years before. And I think it's so powerful and so important that, you know, what, especially from, you know, coming from the lens of disability and mental health, you know, what can we say no to, you know, in order to make room for what we really need and how to nourish ourselves and the people around us. The other thing I just want to throw out to the 3 of you, because you all have written in, you know, at least, you know, multiple genres, and made choices around what you're writing in each of those genres, and how you're dealing with or not dealing with mental health and disability. And I'm just curious, if for each of you, if one genre lends itself more to being able to tackle these issues, or if it's more about a personal journey that allows that space. I'm so curious to hear.
I guess I'll go. I mean, so I wrote the memoir, and that was obviously a personal journey, and that was. But even the novel was a lot of based on personal experience and the people I grew up around. And I don't know what that says about me as a writer, as to whether I'm right now at a point in my career where I'm only, kind of comfortable writing about things that I have experienced, or But I do think a lot of, particularly as a brown writer, I think there's this kind of pressure that I feel from the industry to kind of write about things that that are authentic to me. Like, I don't know, I think it's very difficult, for example, for me to like write if my debut was like a sci-fi novel, with a white protagonist in taking place on Mars. It's harder to break into the industry that way. So to your point, yeah, I really mine personal experiences, and also just I look a lot at what the story needs, and kind of try to build out from there. But it's a lot. I try to make it as authentic as possible, and it just so happens that I've personally, watched people around me deal with a lot of mental health stuff. I personally have dealt with mental health stuff, so I've been able to mine those experiences in my writing.
Yeah, I mean, there's a long history for queer writers in autofiction, which I don't think I was aware of until I'm a very late comer outer. It didn't really officially come out until about 4 years ago, although I've known about my queerness for a very, very long time. So yeah, there is a long history for queer writers in doing autofiction, and the thinking behind that is just that the queer history is so limited and marginalized, that we've needed to tell our own stories. And I think this is true of most marginalized groups of people. We really needed to tell our own stories in order to have a kind of history that we could actually have access to, or give future generations access to. So I'll say that. Yeah, I think, my first book was a young adult novel, Stalker Chronicles, which that was sort of how I was teaching myself how to write fiction, because I didn't go to school for fiction. I went to school for poetry, and then I have spent, many, many years teaching the essay primarily, and now teach the essay and poetry and the novel. And then some queer history too. But I needed to, that Stalker Chronicles is very much based on my teenageness or teenagehood, some parts of it. And then 16 Pills, I think, really just came together as a collection because I had been publishing lots of personal essays online, and I just finally had enough that I could cut and paste them all together. And I was like, oh, I have a book. And then I submitted it to a very, very small press, Tinderbox Editions, and the editor there was really interested in it. And my two novels, Penpocalypse and The Not Wives, have been autofiction. But now, finally, and Sopan, maybe this will, you never know. I guess I'm saying you never know what you'll end up writing. The book I'm working on now is actually the furthest away from me than anything, not really autofiction at all. So in some ways, I think I've just had to really, really stay close to myself for as long as I needed to. But now I feel like I can maybe more fully move into fictional worlds. Like Penpocalypse has time travel, which was totally surprising to me. That ended up happening in the third section, and it got really, really strange. And I had no idea that I could do time travel. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm gonna make a portal, and some people are gonna go through it. And that was hugely fun. And then they went back to 1930s Paris to go to this famous lesbian bar. But yeah, I guess I'm constantly surprised by the things that end up happening to me genre-wise.
That sounds like a lot of fun, and I look forward to reading it.
Sally, I wanted to ask you, well, Sejal, you should go. I wanted to ask Sally just about wheels in general, but Sejal, you should talk about your multi-genre experiences.
You know, actually, let's hear about wheels. That's okay.
Well, I just really loved that piece, and
Yeah,
just wrote down some of the language, like there are no wheels in nature, and we see all kinds of wheels, and then the importance of using the language of the power wheelchair, and then the grace and fluidity of your son moving across the floor in his power wheelchair. So like I was grateful for the clarification about power wheelchair. Like I actually didn't know that. So I was really just like, oh, that is really important for me to know. But I've thought a lot about, so in Pampocalypse, the narrator, she gets a bike and she's disabled, but she's able to ride it, but she falls a lot. And that's based on my experience of getting a bike during COVID and like kind of retraining myself how to ride it. And I've just been thinking a lot about various wheels and as obviously as mobility devices. And then also sometimes people are just like, how can you ride a bike? Like you have a neurological disorder and you fall all the time. And I'm like, it's very strange. I mostly can ride it. So I was just grateful for just new language about wheels, and also that wheels are human made. They don't exist in nature. So I just wondered if you could talk more about the writing of that, or
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I was fascinated to learn that, that so many things are, replicating nature and wheels aren't. And I mean, like so many things in the disability community, I mean, different people have different opinions. So there are certainly people who, say motorized wheelchair or whatever, but I, really latched on early on to that idea of the power wheelchair because, it is powerful. It gives power, right? I think the language around is just so important to think about. So many people just automatically say confined to a wheelchair, confined to a wheelchair. Well, no, actually, the day my son got his power chair when he was 3, is one of the happiest days of my life and will always be, because he finally had the independence that he had been craving since he was little and didn't, have the muscles to have that. One of the first things he did was, take off into the neighbor's yard. He went away from us. He disappeared. He could never do that before. And so, finally he had, just a true sense of independence. And I think, as I said in the piece, what we're not familiar with, we, may shy away from or fear or judge. And I just, I do know many families who have had a kid with a disabling diagnosis that's just kind of, debilitated the family. And of course, I mean, the news at first was a lot to take for my husband and me. But as soon as we processed it and we're like, wait, this is the same kid that we have loved since the moment he was born. He's no different than he was. It just turns out he's not going to walk. He's going to use a wheelchair. I think the more that we can embrace all of the different ways that we live in the world, whether that's through wheels and issues of mobility, or the neurological ways that we operate.
Sally,
Something.
isn't that, didn't you write that in one of my classes? That it's based on theme structure, Priscilla Long and Wendy Call's essays, right? Beautiful Flesh. And I think
that is where it started from. I wrote so many things in your class.
I know, I don't know if we actually said this, but I mean, I learned so much reading Sally's work over a few years, where, I mean, I certainly wouldn't have wouldn't have thought of myself as disabled, or I wasn't really thinking about disability studies, except I was starting to follow Sonia Huber's work, one of my UMass classmates, Margaret Price, just the reading. But then I think also, I think really reading Sally's work for many years and kind of seeing like, okay, where it, in the same way that you're talking about like a wheelchair becoming familiar or not, not this strange thing. I think for me, this language around disability started to feel less charged. Like again, in the town I grew up in, it was like, I think kids who were B students struggled. Like it was a really good school district for A students, and there was support and resource room or whatever for maybe C students. And I saw that and I was like, okay, I think I better track myself, because I'm gonna get lost otherwise. And I guess the other thing I was gonna say, this is just, is I remember seeing Oscar, who's really incredible. I remember seeing him with Mira Jacobs' son, Zakir, and it was like seeing two of the same kind of kid, like the kind of kid that's born and is like a performer. And, it was, I don't even know how young they were then, maybe like 7, but they were talking, they just immediately, I think Zakir was like flying around on the, the wheelchair, and they were, it was really something. It was something to also to get to know these kids through their parents' writing, and through that.
Sally, I just want to say, obviously, you know this, but you're such an awesome parent, because I was a kid who really probably needed a wheelchair for a couple of years in her life before nobody knew. I have a very strange, very rare neurological disorder called dopa-responsive dystonia. I don't make enough dopamine. And for many years, up until I was 12, I was undiagnosed and nobody could figure out what was wrong. And I was really, really struggling to walk, struggling with a lot of pain. And I think, the 80s were such a different time, late 70s and 80s, but, I think there was just so much stigma around the possibility of me having a wheelchair. But I think those last couple of years could have been so much better for me if that would have been possible. So I just think that, parental recognition of that is just so huge and such a gift. So I just wanted to say that.
Well, thank you. You're kind. I think, that the concept of a child in a wheelchair is a lot for some people to wrap their minds around. But again, we're all just people. We just need the accommodations that we need to get through the day, whether that's, caffeine first thing in the morning or, a wheelchair.
I think though that it's still so hard to get some of these accommodations. I think especially with maybe in all cases, but invisible disability, in my own family, I think there's a way in which they don't want to see it. And there are other, I think, undiagnosed members of my extended family where it's just like, well, that person is just that way. And I don't know that a diagnosis always helps, but I think when we don't have language to talk about something and to give some voice to our feelings and experience, that it makes it that much harder to say no, to advocate for yourself in any way. The expectation is that you should be able to do this, to produce this, to get this done in this time, to have a kind of flexibility. What if you can't do that? Or Carley, I had no idea about that illness, diagnosis, disability. I don't even know that until I read your book. I noticed that you walked a certain way, but it wasn't anything. I mean, everybody walks a certain way, right? Like, so.
Yeah, I think everybody does walk a certain way, but yeah, I remember. Yeah, I guess I'm just thinking about how the writing that we're all doing and the writing and all the writers and the books that you showed us. I mean, I think that the writing is also, yeah, I think it has helped us actually all, well, I'll just speak for myself. It's helped me really like come to terms with and being public about my disabilities, even if they are sometimes invisible. It's a lot like my queerness, in fact, in that I felt like, oh, I felt I had really internalized this kind of gold star lesbian ethos that I couldn't come out until I had had a relationship with a woman, which is really absurd. We would never say that to a kid who's queer, like, oh, well, you can't identify that way until you've had sex with someone. But yeah, I think I had really internalized that and heard it a lot from lesbians and gay men of my generation. I think it's really changed for younger people, but I also felt like in some ways I couldn't take on I couldn't label myself as disabled if my disabilities were invisible. So I think the writing that I've done and the writing that I've read has really also been part of the care work that we're talking about, is like becoming part of this community and feeling like I can claim things, even if they don't manifest or sort of turn out the way they might in a more, sort of mainstream. There's nothing mainstream about a disability narrative, but maybe a more sort of traditional narrative about disability or about queerness.
Sopan, I know you have to go in a minute, so final thoughts. Tell us again about the name of your novel and when it's coming out and when we can pre-order it, and any final thoughts.
The novel's called Chaos, Second Act, and what I was at is, when we talk about self-care and therapy, something I found, and I guess this is part of what the novel is about, there are other forms, I find, writing, and I find, music and art to be really valuable forms of self-care and therapy too. If you're struggling or whatever, and it sounds very trite to say, but I find art to be a very powerful way to express yourself, and whether through writing, whether through music, painting, drawing, whatever, those are also, I think, really valuable for for whatever you're able to do. And I understand that art also has equity and accessibility issues and all that, but if you're able to, I also think that and that doesn't necessarily have to cost money, in the way that a therapy session does, but that's something I think about a lot, about how art is, and I just see in chat, you mentioned sports. Sure. Yeah. I mean, look, I guess anything can be therapy, and sports can certainly be therapeutic, and, but yeah, I mean, I can't really argue if you're able to, if that's something, I wouldn't say sports has been a very therapeutic aspect for me, only because I've never been any good at them. So yeah, so that's pretty much yeah. And if you want to pre-order the novel, it's available now to pre-order. It comes out on July 5th, and I hope if there's something that people take away from it, is that art can be a really powerful way to heal, and so that's kind of what I'm trying to convey. And I want to thank all of you. You guys have been a wonderful group to listen to, and I've learned a lot from being here.
Thank you so much for sharing all your perspectives, Sopan, and so excited about your novel. And yeah, I so agree around art. Whatever that creative outlet is, I'm always surprised, right, when I know these things, intellectually, but I'll make excuses to not do the things I might need to do. And then when I sit down and do it, I'm so surprised at, the discoveries I make, or the, whatever it might be. So.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to everyone, and this has been so wonderful. And I would just add that Panpocalypse, you can also pre-order it, is Penpocalypse was really what I decided to do to get myself through COVID. Of course, you know, it seems to never end, but I knew myself that I would need some kind of really sustained writing project, and that it would have to be pretty close to what was going on in the world for me to just kind of be able to process. And so definitely a lot of people have said to me, and I know this will come up when I'm doing more press, you know, well, how did you write a novel during the pandemic? And, you know, it really just was what I needed to sort of sustain myself. But I do tend to be that way with writing. Like I kind of always need a project in order to sort of feel, you know, grounded. So I agree with, I agree with Sopan and all of you, really.
Thank you so much. I would just say to make space for those projects, the importance of saying no to low-level asks, so that you can, maybe you can't go to therapy, but you can take a nap, or you can go on a walk and talk to your college roommate who you haven't talked to in 3 months. Or you can clean out the fridge, or you can watch Law and Order SVU for the 25th time.
Yes.
All of those things are valid, but we don't have the time for that if we have this culture of, busyness, or feeling like you have to, if you're asked, you have to give. And so I love that, Carley. I so admire and appreciate that you know that you need a project and you're always writing. I think for me, it's much more circuitous, and when I'm not feeling well, it's hard to write.
I do have to take pretty significant breaks, though, I'll say that. And I do have to take a lot of naps. You were talking about leveling the playing field, and I will also say that, as a mother, one of the reasons I can write is because my kid lives with her dad half the time, and so that just frees up. It's a huge change. It was a huge change in my life. I mean, now I'm very used to it, but it has given me the kind of time that I think most parents don't have. So I'll just say that too. And I've also kind of trained myself. I only really write for like an hour a day. I just don't do any of those. Like I used to do these like kind of epic, torturous, like 5-hour days of writing. And I just refuse to do that anymore. So I think I've just gotten better about time and I've become a faster writer.
Thank you for saying that thing about 1 hour in a day. I think that's really helpful. And also I'll bring up care work to end with. And like, this was just reading about, she starts it out with like, you can writing in bed, like just doing a little bit. I mean, some people say don't take your laptop to bed, but just like work in the way that your body allows you to work.
Agreed. So important to know what we each individually need, how to take care of ourselves, how to take care of each other, and make that happen. This has been such a wonderful conversation. I'm so grateful to Sopan, who had to jump off, and Carley and Sejal. Sejal, thank you so much for bringing us all together in this way. And thank you everyone who is part of our audience, who will be listening to this very soon. And just as a reminder, with Carley and Sopan's books, please do pre-order it. For those of you who don't know, it's so important for the life of a book, and for the writers, those pre-orders really matter. But thank you all, and take care.